I'm sorry for the delay, but we finally did this. Welcome to Environmental Coffee House and Climate Changes and the Rising Tide. Antonio Reid, Sandy Shellis, and Nicholas Humphrey, meteorologist. Welcome. I don't know if anybody's joined us yet, guys, but they were probably waiting, and I'm going to see if we're live. So, good evening. I
Good
know
evening.
that I'm going to do this. Antonio, why don't you start with a little bit of what we were talking about, what I wanted to talk about? Nicholas, pick up a little and let me do a little technical things behind. I see we have 8 people. Thank you. So go for it.
Okay, so I'm not exactly sure what it is that you were.
Okay.
Are you talking about the conversation we're having about the
The,
Environmental Protection Agency?
yes. Oh, look, it looks great. Okay, we have 18 people. Yay! All right, then I'll start it and you guys pick up after me. All right?
Okay.
Okay. As I was If you guys didn't know out there, the EPA has this thing. The EPA is the Environmental Protection Agency in the United States to limit science used to write public health laws. Now, the EPA is responsible for our Clean Air Act here, our Clean Water Act, and they hire scientists, they do research, but in scientific research, very often for this kind of material, you use human subjects. Human subjects are people that will participate in your research, which means they could participate physically, they could participate in the social sciences one, they could participate with letting their medical tests be used. Any kind of identifiable data information about a person is supposed to be confidential under the human subjects rules in research. I was a research administrator for 20 years. And when I look at this and how they want to, the new draft, which is called Strengthening Transparency in Regulatory Science, would require scientists to disclose all of their raw data, including those confidential medical records. You see, that's that this Andrew Wheeler, they're hot to trot, and basically what it is they really want to dismiss the research that was used for the clean air rules. They want to get rid of. It was done by a 1993 Harvard University project that definitively linked polluted air to premature deaths, right? And they want to say, they're saying that these new rules could possibly just negate the research that was used to be the bedrock of these regulations that protect Americans from pollution and kind of gives the green light to the polluters. And I see you shaking your head, Nick. It's just really pisses me off because Scott Pruitt, who was the first corrupt EPA administrator under the Trump administration, um, they had a proposal, drew 600,000 comments, and the vast majority were opposition to doing this. Researchers have a hard enough time getting this kind of stuff done and approved to be the bedrock for these rules to protect us in our country. We are going backwards, and it's just how I wanted to start. And the last thing I wanted to talk about, there was 1.2 million people that confirmed the Harvard findings. And this was a 1995 American Cancer Society study. Can you imagine the kind of data? This is not data that should be just, willy-nilly been able, because what will happen is the research will happen, it'll be again the bedrock, and then every denier, every the Heritage Institute, they'll all want to claim the data, and they'll all want to say we're going to manipulate this data. They'll manipulate the data to suit their needs, and then the rules, they won't happen. So there'll be dumping, and there'll be burning, and there'll be air pollution, and there'll be no regulations on anything. And so that, it's wrong. It's just wrong. So, guys, the last thing I had to say was about Stephen Malloy because he was on Trump's transition team. And this guy runs a climate denying site called junkscience.org, a website that questions established climate change scientists to science and contends particulate matter and smog does not harm health. Okay, That's a good one. Ask anybody. Ask them in Beijing. So
Yeah.
at that note, which one of you want to take this up, guys?
Well, Nick, I'll let you go first.
Well, I was just thinking about that last part because I have asthma, so I'm pretty sure particulate matter is harmful to people, particularly people sensitive, asthma, children, and elderly. So, I mean, one of the problems with allowing that kind of data to get out and be in the open is not only does it leave it open to manipulation by deniers of, well, deniers obviously of any sort of science and the scientific method, is also it makes it harder to get people to participate in such studies in the future because they'll know their medical information won't be protected. Why would you want to do that if you know it's going to be used in particularly invasive ways, and you're not necessarily sure your identity will be protected either. So, and then of course they'll probably be, if they're willing to do something like this, they'll probably be willing to try to change rules and make it more difficult for the government to fund such studies. So I mean, it's
Yeah.
well, it's one thing I've noticed.
Funding now.
Yeah, I mean that's one thing I've noticed with the Trump. Everything is turning the clock backwards. All little bit of progress that's been made in terms of climate change, politics, which isn't very much in the United States, but there's been some things, and obviously clean air, clean water, everything's being turned backwards to make it just easier on companies to raise their profit margin that much more. And it's pretty sad to watch because they every Republican, it seems to be backing these kind of policies, and some Democrats too, unfortunately. So it's been something that's been disheartening to watch and flip on the news and see something else that suggests that they just want to turn the clock backwards just to make more money. That's all they care about is the dollar bill.
That's what they care about.
In my perspective, I don't know how far the clock is being turned backwards, because you think about really the legacy of the EPA. The EPA has been at the center of many environmental catastrophes. I mean, we saw the EPA approve pipelines, the Keystone XL pipeline, for example, and you see what's happening with that today. We've seen that the EPA under the Obama administration had been hijacked several times. I mean, Regina McCarthy was at the head of the EPA during the Obama administration, and they were doing extensive studying on the impacts that fracking had on the environment. And the Obama administration, we now know from the top levels of the White House, had pushed EPA to reverse its headline finding on fracking, saying that fracking did not pose systemic damage to drinking water in 2015. And then right before the Trump administration would have sent to the White House, it was clear the Obama administration in 2016 was going in the exact opposite direction. So one year the Obama administration, was riding off of the wave of the fracking boom and how it was, contributing to the economy. And then the next year, they're starting to see that former Secretary of State Clinton is losing her grasp on the possible presidency, and Donald Trump is rising, and then he's going the opposite way. But you had even Bill McKibben, 350.org, calling the White House, demanding that Obama just simply accept science, and the EPA accept the science on fracking. But also remember, Josh's Fox Gasland comes out during the Obama administration. We had situations where the EPA was being called out to people's housing, and people are getting lesions on their skin. They're having all types of gastrointestinal problems. And the EPA was there every step of the way saying that the water was safe. Where's the EPA in Flint? So to me, it's not just that we have an EPA crisis under the Trump administration. The EPA has been a complete and total failure from Reagan to Clinton to Obama, to Bush, to Trump.
How do you fix it?
Well, that's a whole separate question, but it is good for us to at least accept in our analysis that the EPA has been failing us on the issues of climate and environment.
Well, I mean, they're under the executive branch, so the only way to change it is to have a president that actually can't be bought out. It doesn't.
Yeah, and I think we've got the
very
potential.
difficult task.
It does, doesn't it? But we've got the potential, don't we?
Yeah, I mean, you have some presidents that are obviously worse than others when it comes to corporate interests, but they all have, they've all had corporate connections, in some way, shape, or form. I mean, I don't know. Some people may consider Obama better than others in a lot of things, but clearly on environmental issues and in the fossil fuel growth, that was not one of those things.
Right.
I think that's really the only way you can change it, to change the culture, if you will, of the EPA, is to have a president that will make them change, and that hasn't existed up to now.
Well, and looking at this historically, and also to try to tackle the question, how do you fix this, and piggybacking off Nick here, look at what FDR did for the state of American politics.
Okay.
That that FDR had changed the state of American politics so much that you had radical madman Richard Nixon putting together the EPA. Now, you can fault the EPA, as I just did, but that in of itself is truly a testament to the type of New Deal, Great Society type of robust government participation in society dictate that was transcended in American philosophy at the time, that even radical Republicans like Nixon, and Nixon to me is like a prototype of the Trump phenomena, a prototype of the Ronald Reagan phenomena. But even someone as madman as Nixon put together the EPA, a Republican. So I think that's the type of political atmosphere and culture that we need right now, where Republicans are so embarrassed to come out and environment and endanger our American families.
Exactly.
We should move the conversation to Overton window so far to what's considered the United States to the left, where it should be embarrassing. It should be embarrassing to say, no, we're going to go in the opposite direction of science. We're going to poison our kids with chemical fertilizers. We're going to put fracking wells right beside schools in Texas. It should be embarrassing to say things like that. But we're so far radically right now that not only are those things part of the conversation, those things are just happening and people are accepting them.
Yeah.
People are accepting it. People are sheeple. But I think we need a revolution. Yeah. I'm just so disgusted. I watch all the topical things, and I listen to my shows, and my internet youth that I was listening to Let the Madness Begin today, interacting with their show, and I get so frustrated. But I guess it's a perfect segue if we could go into, since Nicholas is with us, and we've now just discussed the EPA and got a little of my frustration out, and we know politically what we got to do. What's going on in the weather world? Like we don't know. Tell us something we don't know.
Well, I mean, everyone knows it's cold, unless you're in California, I guess, or on the West Coast. But yeah, I guess the biggest story I've been following outside the United States has been the fires in Australia and New South Wales and part of Queensland. That's been truly devastating what's been going on there. I even heard there was a day a couple of days ago where there was no recorded rainfall in any station in this entire continent of Australia, which was that's a big place to not have any rainfall recorded anywhere. So they're getting tons of drought still. heat that's abnormal for springtime down there, and the fires are just they're just ferocious, and it's what we're witnessing is basically a preview of the future, and you're going to be seeing more fires, bigger, hotter, all over the world. We're already starting to really see that ramp up. What we saw in Siberia earlier this summer, what we saw in the Amazon. Even though those fires were started on purpose, they had drought conditions and abnormally dry conditions to allow them to grow to such proportions. Africa, Indonesia, and of course California as well. So I mean, it's in Alaska, so it's unfortunate. But as this planet is continuing to warm, one of the things we're going to see is big time is heat, drought, and the result of that being fire, killing species, plant species, and animal species that depend on those habitats. I was really one of the saddest things I heard was about the koalas, hundreds of koalas getting killed in the fires in an animal preserve in Australia as well.
That's really that's the heartstring tugger on everything is the wildlife and the wildlife deaths. I've been listening to Derek Jensen a lot lately just to get my, I guess my earth spiritual thing on, and I really feel it when we talk about the destruction of the wildlife, the animals and all. It's just
Well, you
mind-boggling.
for the thousands and tens of thousands of people that we know are dying all the time in these natural disasters, that there are probably millions of creatures, individual creatures being killed too, because they have no access to any of the technology that humans have that we've been using, more and more over thousands of years to try to protect ourselves from the environment. And now the environment's rapidly changing, and we're still, as humans, largely able to insulate ourselves, some more, a lot better than others, depending on what country you live in. But the animals, they're in the environment. They're left to their device, to the wrath of nature without anything. And if it's too hot, if they're a flying fox or a bird, they fall out of the sky. If they're a koala, they can't escape the fires and they're rushing to the tops of the trees. There's no escape. For them, abrupt climate change is immediate danger. Even before it is for human beings. Human beings are kind of putting themselves in a corner because they have the technology to sort of try to put up sort of metaphorical walls to try to protect themselves from the fires, protect themselves from the heat, the cold,
Right.
Air conditioning, everything else. The animals, they have nothing.
Nothing. Mm.
One thing I wanted to comment on that is that, I just witnessed for the first time these temperature whiplashes, these climate effects are really becoming visible. But we had, for us, September's average high temperature is about 80 degrees. And October is about 70 degrees. For the entire month of September, the temperatures were routinely 90 to almost 100 degrees. And the felt-like temperature, the relative humidity temperature, had us close to over 100 degrees, 104, 105 on some days. And this just went right on up until about October 7th. So I call it a super summer. The hottest part of the year for us is July, which has an average high temperature of 88 degrees Fahrenheit. So we were doing 10, 15 degrees above average high temperature for the part of the year in September and October, for the first week of October. And then it moderated. We went very quickly into a fall, like a normal fall, in October for like 2 to 3 weeks. And then we just been hit by this cold front. It's going to be 22 degrees tonight. we had snow in some parts. There's still leaves on the trees that are very much green. The leaves have started changing, and they've been changing a little bit over the very, very small fall that we've had. But we did not see a fall this year. We had a super summer. It should have been 70 something degrees outside the first week of October, and it was almost, it felt like almost 100. That's you know, and I thought to myself, I just genuinely, when I look up now, I see less birds in the sky. I see less insects in my backyard. I haven't seen a single firefly or lightning bug, depending on what part of the country you're from. This entire
Lightning bugs this year. We had a couple, just a couple, not like usual where you look out in the back and. Mm-mm.
we've had nothing. And I lived in an area where you would see lightning bugs if there were any during the summer, and there were absolutely none. So I think that at least for where we are, this weather whiplash effect has completely devastated migratory patterns. It's completely devastated the growing season. It's completely tricked the forest into shedding its leaves at the wrong time, to blooming at the wrong time. At least from my perspective, as somebody who is in myself quite detached from nature, I would say even in my detached state, I can tell that the weather, the climate, at least the ecology around here is in a complete state of shock. It is a total state of utter shock, and it would have to be. I mean, from the animals to the microbes to the plants, everything would have to be in a state of shock.
Everything kind of is.
I actually read a story a couple days ago about spring blooming and fall in Alaska.
There was and the pussy willows were coming out.
Yeah.
I think I read it on your page.
Yeah, I posted it because it was like, wow, it's like November.
And these birds are coming back to areas they're not supposed to be, and things are blooming. It's these weather patterns are throwing everything off. I noticed here too.
Yeah, I mean that's probably one of the easiest ways to sort of dredge out if the jet stream and things are acting abnormal, and not highly anomalous, is how are the creatures reacting, because they deal with extreme events as well as normal conditions all the time. But if you're getting more and more extreme, again, versus normal, what would be normal and average and normal variability, then you start seeing weird things happen, like the birds doing strange things, the insects disappearing, the fall blooming in spring, or the spring blooming in fall, things like that. So
what do? We watch it, we talk about it, we rail for our causes to end factory farming, we politically get involved, we follow Stuart Scott going to COP this year, and he's been railing about, now what is it, 25 cops, and where are we? We've got what?
Yeah.
That's a whole other thing. I thought, see how I can just segue right into something different. Interesting.
Well, Sandy, I think in responding, I share what I'm doing, because I think everybody will have to fill out their own role. But, one of the things that I'm doing via the assessment that I even now have you helping me edit, and I for that, is pushing the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Everybody in the United States is entitled to know what the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is doing, what its safety evaluations call for, what safeguards they have in place, and they're allowed to push the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. If you have good questions, ask the Nuclear Regulatory regulators, call them, email them, ask them, are our nuclear regulatory facilities safe? If we were to be experiencing an episode of abrupt climatic change and sea level rise. say, what would 3 feet of sea level rise do to our nuclear facilities? Are nuclear facilities prepared for that? I've been engaged in a conversation now since June 28 of 19, so this year, with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and its regulators and some of its experts about this. And, I was totally shocked about how robust that conversation has been and the type of engagement that the commission's willing and ready to do. Now, of course, my questions have been very precise, and I've been talking about sea level rise projections coming from National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration and the temperature rise projections that come out of even doing analysis from the International Energy Agency on the Paris pledges and saying, well, if we're expected to get at least 2.7 to 3.5 degrees Celsius by the end of the century, then we should be able to expect this amount of impacts to happen. Are facilities prepared for that? And I think that you don't have to have an expert knowledge to ask these type of serious, rigorous, and critical questions, right? So I don't know a lot about hydrology, but what I do know is that, and just come up in this conversation, is that as temperature rises for every 1 degree Celsius, we're going to expect 5 to 7% more moisture in the atmosphere. And that can translate back down as these huge rain events that we've been seeing around the world. And so our nuclear facilities that were built in the 1960s, 1970s, 80s, and 90s prepared for a world that is actually atmospherically, physically very just different than the world that when these design basis were put into implementation and construction. And I think that regulators do want to have that conversation with people. Now, how much is actually going to happen in way of changing policy, I don't know. But if you have a very informed, participatory democracy, that really gets people moving. I know just working in the compounds of politics that if there's a significant portion of people, and we only mean by significant, about 3% of the population that becomes actively involved on projects, that moves not only the Overton window, so the conversation in which we're having these topics, but also the policy agenda itself. So one of the things that we've been seeing just recently is that in the mainstream, these words like climate catastrophe, the collapse of civilization, are being picked up on Vice, being picked up at the New York Times. This was not something that was happening in 2013.
No, it wasn't happening in 2016 when I started this.
And so that's part of this little, but that's part of the matrix, right, that we're in, so to speak. And I mean matrix as in that you can whisper, and then eventually that whisper turns into a roar at the end of this big, box. But that's what happens. So we can start the conversation somewhere, and it's a serious. There's truth to it. It's a valid thing. It just starts echoing, and then there's the very real fact that climate change again is happening, and so we actually see it coming at us, and so the idea that, oh, wow, look at all these catastrophes. Oh, could this possibly mean collapse of civilization? And people are putting that conversation together. So this is, I think, a good time to challenge people, because those regulators that you're talking to, they're not asleep on this. They've heard of what's happening in the New Yorker with David Wells' Uninhabitable Earth. They've heard about the IPCC report urging transformations in every aspect of society. So they're well aware. I mean, and then of course, the impacts, what's happened to the Bahamas, what's happened to Houston. So I think that people being engaged and really asking their city, not just the NRC, don't get me wrong. I mean, there's a whole host of people that we could be asking, hey, is our city's infrastructures prepared for this? And we know, at least holding my view, that ultimately the answer to all these questions is no, right? We can't be facing a biological annihilation, insect apocalypse, 9 feet of sea level rise by the end of the century, 3 degrees Celsius by 2050. And then our civilization, all these people are saying, oh, no, we're ready for this. No, of course, you're not ready for this. And you can go a long way about having that conversation.
Who's ready? I mean, you think the billionaires in the bunkers are ready? Shit. No one is ready. Nicholas, what are we going to see? What are we going to see? Even
Well, I
more
mean, I was
to
going to
be
say, if you
ready
need to
for.
build, if you need to build a bunker, you're already unprepared. I mean, it's because that's basically your emergency measure to try to protect yourself from everything going to hell in a handbasket. So I mean, it's not like there's anything to be prepared. The way to prepare for it, you can't. I mean, it's coming. There's like 9 different things literally happening simultaneously, from extinctions of species, ocean acidification, and then you have global heating that's causing deserts to grow and fires to erupt. And I mean, it's just chaos. It's just so I mean, preparation is this whole idea of adaptation. Adaptation to me is more of a battling a battle, if you will, in retreat. You're going to retreat. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it, because you're going to lose your cities to higher sea levels. You're going to lose your agricultural land to the desert. You can try to do things to try to slow that process down, make resources more equitable to people that actually need it, and not have so much wasting of resources. You can do all sorts of things to try to mitigate that,
yes.
But you're always in retreat. And of course, in order to admit that you need to do those kind of measures, you have to admit that there's nothing you can do to necessarily stop abrupt climate change and the extinctions that are underway right now. And that's sort of the kicker that a lot of people aren't willing to do. If they're not in complete denial of climate change and all these other ecological damages that are accelerating, they're in denial that there's processes that are at work that can't be stopped by humans alone. Humans initiated them, but you can't turn back the clock on what's already been done. So it's
Hierophant's with us. Hello. Oh, he's a bright guy. He says, we're not retreating, we're just advancing in the opposite direction.
We're just advancing.
Oh, wow.
I mean, all these ideas that people have that they think will stop climate change and save the planet, they're actually pretty good ideas for this retreat situation. They're not going to, the idea of planting trees and all that, that's not going to remove enough carbon from the atmosphere, even close to the speed that it's required to reverse the global heating that's underway and what's baked in. You have all this heat in the ocean that's being slowly circulated back in the atmosphere ocean system. But it's a great idea if you still want to mitigate effects of some carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, if you still want to try to slow desertification that the global warming is causing. If you want to have cooler cities, having more trees is very helpful. Those ideas are great, but we're not even doing that at all. As governments, no government is really seriously, or most governments. I think there's a few ideas that have gone out there, and I think in India they're planted a bunch of trees, and in Ireland they've proposed, I think, to plant a bunch of trees. But not on a global scale where this idea is,
because the governments are not implementing a global climate emergency, for God's sakes. They're not doing it. And it needs to be done.
Or if they're announcing that we have a climate emergency, it's just talk.
Yeah, but XR is out there ad nauseum. Every week we read about them, but is everybody reading about them? I have an XR window sticker on my truck, and people think it's probably a band.
Well, I mentioned this to somebody to some friends the last week. I sit in coffee shops, a lot. When I do my writing or whatever, and I don't hear anyone talking about climate change. I don't hear anyone talking about the problems with the fires that are going on around the world. I don't hear anyone talking about the extinctions. I hear no one talking about the things that really matter toward our survival. Everyone's talking about, political issues that are maybe important, but they're not necessarily the core of what concerns our survival on this planet.
Oh, like Buttigieg
or
speaks Norwegian.
yeah, something silly like that.
Oh, human condition.
I mean, we are truly truly a sort of a species, and particularly a group of people, if we're talking about Americans or Westerners, since that's my experience, where we're really insularly focused on what's going on in our world. Our world being the political world, the social world, but nature. Nobody talks about nature, and that's really the key. If you really want to have like a global climate emergency, a global emergency period for what's happening to the planet,
Yep.
people have to think that nature is the most important thing on the plate. Not terrorism, not starting some new war with Iran or or some other nonsense. No, it's nature is being destroyed, and we are a part of the problem. And if we can't find a solution, what can we do to at least alleviate the damage?
There's no second chance here.
To the best of our ability.
Antonio, do you think there's a second chance here? You're the youngest one.
I think that it's important for people to accept at some point that there are consequences to your actions. For me as a historian, it doesn't, I accept in a very intellectual and emotional sense that great tragedies befall human civilizations. So to me, it seems it's not out of the question that I have to look now at my parents' generation, my grandparents' generation, and realize that there was a point in time that we could have reduced our emissions in line with averting climate catastrophe. That time has come and gone. There is no physical possibility that this generation, the people living today, people living tomorrow, people living for, I mean, it's really hard to say, but all future human generations for the foreseeable present will only know a climate that is at war with them. For us, we will only see a climate that is becoming increasingly each year more different than the climate we were born into. I was probably likely the last generation, the millennial generation, was probably the last generation to even see anything that was similar to the Holocene climate. And of course, obviously, in the late 80s, the 90s, we were well underway in the climate transition. But now even the seasons themselves appear to be changing. We're seeing sharp departures in different regions from their normal temperature averages. And that just is temperature is so dynamic in terms of what it means for regional ecology. You cannot have summertime temperatures for weeks at a time in the middle of the winter. That just drastically changes everything.
Pakistan, what did it get to be there in Fahrenheit? 120, 122, insane temperatures.
So, and we're seeing this at people are talking about, and I think it's so interesting, but people are talking about 1.5 degree. 1 degree is what I would describe as already a very dangerous situation. Um, 1.5 degrees is, because you think about this like, for people who aren't familiar, think about it like the Richter scale, the earthquake scale. Each degree Celsius global average is a magnitude different. Okay, so it's not like you're just gradually moving up. Oh, 1, oh, 2, oh, 3. No. These really mean something starkly different. And the 1.5 degree world really does, I think, push us into quite a situation where, I mean, governability is just um, but 2 degrees would be so 1.5 degrees I would describe as immensely dangerous. And 2 degrees I think is right to call catastrophic. Um, and that's kind of where we are in the next 10 years at 1.5, 2 degrees. And I was talking with Nick in our last conversation, but there's still even a good chance that we could be warming even faster than that. By 2040, we could be at 2 degrees or even more. Uh, so I think that people have to be willing to accept that there are going to be significant and major impacts no matter what we do. But just like me pushing the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, it's about mitigating the worst possible futures. And I think that's what we have to dedicate our energies to, is that because people are still having children. That is fortunately something that is going on. But those children have to suffer in really quite unimaginable ways in a short period of time from now.
I do believe it. I do believe it. And there was a discussion. I guess it was Derek. He made a video. Do you prepare the children, or do you lie to them? Basically, of course,
I mean, I don't. If you don't lie, you do lie. That doesn't stop nuclear fires.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, kids, and they don't even go outside. They're never even going to know what these animals, these things were, except for a picture. But I guess,
Well, I mean, you tell them as much, as they need to know based on their age and what's actually happening around them. I mean, if you talk about what's happening far away and you deal with what's happening right in your backyard, I mean, weather, weather has always had its extreme events. We're just getting more and more and more and more of them piling up. So it's causing, things that we take for granted, like food, at least here in the Western world, food, water, things we take for granted, to be threatened. And, these kind of conversations and experiences are already things that go on in some parts of the developing world, where there are droughts, famines, warfare. People have kids, and the kids have to grow up kind of early to understand what's happening. That's basically increasingly going to become our experience. And for the people that are already dealing with it, it's just going to be worse, unfortunately. And they're going to be coming our way soon enough. And then we're going to have to decide how compassionate are we going to be to the people that have already faced what we're worrying about facing, in a world that's so warm that our technology and our resources and our ability to sort of defend ourselves from nature, because that's basically what civilization is designed to do, is to defend humans from the wrath of nature. Like I said, the animals don't have civilization protecting them. Civilization's for humans to protect ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's because it collapses elsewhere and it's faltering here, and we have all these millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people shifting northward, poleward, away from the extreme heat, the violent cyclones, the drought, just like fair weather that never ends and just bakes the land, and there's no food, how are we going to treat those people in their time of need when our time is also becoming more and more needy as well? That's kind of my biggest fear. It's not just climate change; it's the potential for war to break out because people won't know how to deal with each other, and people are going to be afraid and have fear of each other, and that's my far bigger concern, actually.
That's a good segue to ask Antonio. We're worried about war. What about the nuclear? You're looking at nuclear power, but what about nuclear arms? Do you have something to suggest so we're not scared of that too?
Yeah, unfortunately.
What a upbeat night. Yeah, but this is what we're living in. We're living with this, so no sugarcoating here.
Yeah, no. The nuclear front, as far as militarized nuclearization, I've described it as a failure. That the nonproliferation was a failure. We engaged in a project in the 1950s and 1960s to really start limiting the spread of nuclear weaponry to countries around the world, nuclear technologies, that really sped up with the creation of the International Atomic Energy Agency, and also, of course, the Non-Nuclear Proliferation Treaty. But I think that humans have almost, we haven't felt as bad because, obviously there has not been a detonation of a nuclear bomb over civilian areas since 1945. But we haven't stopped building weapons. And actually, the type of weapons that we're building now increase the likelihood that we'll use these type of weapons. So interestingly enough, so tactical nuclear weaponry, surgical nuclear weaponry, and I think that people should know when Obama left the White House in 2016, he did so specifically, not the United States military, but specifically the U.S. nuclear arsenal. He upgraded by $1 trillion. That upgrade went, of course, in part to maintaining the current nuclear arsenal, but building a whole host of new, what he calls surgical smart bombs. So we really doubled down here in the United States on our stance that no, we are not dismantling our nuclear weaponry. We are upgrading and developing and turning more sophisticated our nuclear weapons. The Russians have responded. They built the nuclear engines, and we've actually just witnessed one explode. Was that 2 months ago in northern Russia at one of their war facilities? But that's what that was. And what is a nuclear engine? Well, essentially, it's a small-scale nuclear reactor on a warhead. So the Russians have created this engine to get around any type of land defense, anti-missile, or land, so surface to air defense system the United States could develop. So no. Well, what about in the South? Well, we don't fare any better there. The Indians and the Pakistanis are.
Wait a minute. Don't talk for a second. Something's going on with the sound. I have no idea what happened. Nicholas, you talk.
Oh, well, he was talking about India and Pakistan. I was actually just thinking about
speaker.
Can you hear me?
Okay,
yeah, I can
now
hear
it's
him
okay.
now.
It went away.
Yeah.
Ooh, we had something cosmic. It's really dark.
Well, I'll be really quick and end on that point.
No,
But
keep going.
what I was saying was that looking at the situation in India and Pakistan, I mean, these are both nuclear armed states,
Yeah.
and they're on the verge of all-out military aggression in the Kashmir region. But I would also say that China is another actor there. Why? Well, climate change pulls in the Himalaya mountains. Those glaciers feed literally, or excuse me, water, literally hundreds of millions of people, both the Chinese and Indian side. And we can really start to see that as those glaciers decline by the 2030s, serious house for conflict. But not only that, sea level rise is really going to, there's just a recent study that was published about the impacts of sea level rise. And they talk about sea level rise is going to be more dynamic because of the type of topographic, mapping they've done of the coastlines around the world. And what they found is actually 3 feet of sea level rise is actually going to be much more damaging than what they originally thought. And so we're talking about 1.5 feet completely destroying the Mekong Valley. We're talking about Bangladesh being completely inundated. So we're talking about that entire area of Indochina up through Bangladesh being destabilized. Population of, I think, close to 125 million people. So this is something, this has to happen now because we are on a trajectory of about 2 to 3 feet of sea level rise by the 2035, 2040 time period. So we would have to start seeing the large scale destabilization of these kind of Indo-Chinese and Bangladeshi populations within the next, I would say, 5 to 10, maybe 15 at the latest years from now. And when we see these things go, we can really see them go. I mean, take, for example, the destabilizations of populations in southeastern Africa, where cyclones last year devastated. Was it last year or earlier this year? Mozambique. We saw a population
this year. Yeah.
We saw a population of 350,000 people. 350,000 people is a good chunk of people. They were stable one day and got wiped out by a typhoon the next, and that destabilized instantly 350,000 people who now have to go to different cities, who have to go to different municipalities, and like Nick is saying, really already where resources are already being utilized and toward the edge, we're going to start to see resources and services strain additionally because of these displaced populations.
Jeez. Have another question, a real one, a real quickie. What do you see in the South China Sea? That was what Sam Mitchell Hambone always was saying, that the South China Sea was where it was going to start the whole, warring thing. Do you feel anything about that one?
I do think the South China Sea is going to be a hotbed area. The Chinese are building aircraft carriers. That certainly gives you an idea of what they're thinking. They built man-made islands in the South China Sea. So for the Chinese, which will be the largest economy, that's another kind of interesting dynamic thing about this, but the Chinese will be the largest economy on Earth by 2030. And probably. Their trajectory is to be almost twice the size of the U.S. economy by 2050. So the Chinese are really going to be exploding throughout this century. And if it were not for climate change, of course, they won't actually achieve any of this. Shanghai is going to be underwater before the middle of the century.
And Beijing, they can't breathe.
So they're not going to fulfill this, but they're actually on a trajectory where they will supersede our economy soon enough. But also another thing the Chinese have done, they kind of keep pace with the United States level R&D military investment is, they have advanced cyber programs that copy a lot of our technology. So in the long run, what that's helped them do is prevent them from spending the same amount of money, but not getting the same results, the same quality, but pretty significant quality compared to what they're actually spending. So they've been able to play that game. I think that the South China Sea is going to be a hot spot, but also another hot spot that people need to be aware about is the Arctic. As sea lanes open up in the
Oh,
Arctic,
absolutely. For God's sakes, they're chomping at the bit to just like LNG. They have gas and oil in their mind. It's insane, and all I can think of is we just got to get rid of this one idiot in the White House and start being a beacon of light for others to follow.
I don't think that's any hope. I really don't think it's about getting rid of Donald Trump because if you read all of
all the other ones, all the oligarchies, all the corporations that want to kill the Arctic.
It's the system.
Wishful
it's Donald
thinking.
Trump. And that's the
thinking.
most important thing that Americans need to think about going into this next election. Donald Trump is not the problem. The problem is the system that we have that put Trump in power. Okay, and if we don't understand this, that capitalism or corporate state capitalism or whatever the system is, it is systematically attacking the biosphere. And it doesn't value planetary life. It doesn't value human life, and it certainly doesn't value the life of other Earthlings. It will do whatever it can to extract for the purposes of profit until there is no more life that it can use for those mechanical devices. So we really do have to overcome this system. And I do disagree with David Spratt. He kind of makes fun of the idea that we're going to have to overthrow the capitalist system as kind of a precondition to responding to climate change. Yes, because if we don't, what we'll end up doing is lowering our emissions. But think about that. This whole lowering emissions, to me, this whole idea of addressing climate change by lowering emissions, it's not too dissimilar from the argument that you could cut down the Amazon rainforest with electric chainsaws and electric bulldozers. I mean, the idea, the problem isn't the emissions that you're getting from the Amazon rainforest. It's the fact that you're cutting down the Amazon rainforest. Okay?
Yeah.
Oh, and what about all the oil that's floating around in northern Brazil, and those people can't get it cleaned up because they're in denial, but yet thousands of gallons are blackening the beaches up there, and it was in the news 2 weeks ago, and it's not been in the news since.
Well, just like the Keystone Exxon pipeline, we watched the first black president come on national TV and tell us why Native Americans were being put in dog kennels and being blasted with water cannons in sub-zero temperature, telling us that he's going to watch it play out.
Yeah, watch it play out.
That if you build this pipeline, it's going to rupture.
And it did.
And it did. And it did. And what is the New York Times saying now? What is Rachel Maddow saying now? What is Anderson Cooper saying now? What is Don Lennon saying now? They're silent on the issue. For them, it's a non-issue. They would rather, like you say, talk about Donald Trump's tweet. And it's exactly that type of mania that's distracting the population from the crises at hand. If people if the news just reported on all the extreme weather events, and I don't mean extreme in a hyperbole sense, I mean all of the events that register as statistically extreme in the United States over the last year, if the news just focused on that, people would be freaking out right now.
Yeah.
People would be, but okay, so we get people to freak out. How do you channel that freak out to constructive change?
Well, the first thing you do is you take that freak out and for the media, for people who are good with communicating digital messaging and commercial messaging, turn that freak out into rage against these politicians who are denying climate change. This is absolutely ridiculous. People, we have to, when we watch these storms destroy our cities, think about, well, who's in government right now saying that we have to continue destroying our cities? Who's in government right now saying I have to protect the oil industry? We got to stop emissions. If you can relate the climate crisis to who's in government right now, you'll know what to do. The first course of action will be to vote for someone who at least recognizes the crisis. The second course of action is you're going to have to get smart. You can't vote for any blue Democrat like Governor Jerry Brown over there in California, who talks about, oh, we got to have solar, oh, we got to have wind, but we got to drill, baby, too.
Jerry's out.
Well, he was there though.
Oh, he was there. Oh, he was
The
there.
legacy,
He was there back in my day with Linda Ronstadt. He was there.
The legacy under Jerry Brown is devastating. The amount of fracking infrastructure that he allowed to get poured into that state alone is probably going to push the planet off the edge. So, so we thank him for the few solar panels and turbines that he did get through in California, but really the hydraulic fracturing and the huge methane leaks coming out of California put all of that to rest pretty quickly. And so that's another thing that people will have to be dynamic about in their political decisions. We just can't vote for people who talk the talk. We actually have to look and be smart and be active and be very knowledgeable about who our politicians are. There are people who are talking about going green, and when they're talking about green, they mean cash, and they're really fun.
Yeah, they do. They're goddamn liars, and they've got. Oh, we're going to get into that conversation.
It starts there. People are saying, oh, can I eat less meat, or no more straws, no more plastic. You can do all of those things too, but what's going to have a more dynamic impact is the way that we go about our governance. And that's why ultimately I think, Sandy, you brought up that question about the EPA, because the EPA is really supposed to be a vanguard. It's supposed to be a safeguard, making sure that these externalities are not getting so out of control that they actually endanger the species. But if we don't have people who are willing to hold our politicians accountable, people who are willing to say, what the hell is wrong with CNN bringing on Mark Morano to debate climate change with Bill Nye Science Guy, instead of having a genuine scientific discussion with our top scientists on the issue that's threatening our children.
Right on.
CNN is what people should be saying. But that's also part of the fight,
recognizing
CNN and Fox News kind of operate in the same medium. Their mission is to deceive you on the question of regulating fossil fuels. And they have different ways to do that. For Fox News, it's just directly lie about climate change. And for CNN, it's to confuse the people on the issue. Okay? So we're going to have a skilled actor, Mark Morano, debate a movie actor, Bill Nye the Science Guy. Bill Nye the Science Guy is not a climatologist.
No, he's not.
So why would we have two people who have no expertise on the biggest issue?
Because we live in a reality TV show world. At least our country is.
And
what do you think,
Nicholas?
I'm
over talking, but you see, I'm
oh no, you're great. This is great. I just see his eyes go, and I want to hear what's behind that brain in this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, it's with. I think Antonio pointed out something I've noticed too. Either it's outright hardcore denial, in Fox News and in that part of the conservative media function in that world, or it's, it is confusion. Where it's, what is really this issue of climate change? What is this guy saying, that guy saying we need balance and stuff like that. No, you don't need balance. You need facts. You need reality, because the decisions that need to be made need to be based on factual, truthful information that deals with what we know to the best of our knowledge, so we can make the best decisions. But of course, that would mean getting away from fossil fuels.
And that's what we do here in independent media, independent journalism.
Yeah, and I mean, you have corporate interests that are all over. I mean, people don't think that fossil fuels and media have anything to do with each other, that there's all sorts of money that trades hands all over the place, and you can't depend on those that have a lot of money necessarily having your best interest at heart. It sounds kind of obvious, but
it's obvious. We know they don't have our best interest in heart, because the EPA, now I just feel like they don't care about us. I honestly never was this way, and I've been saying this a little bit lately. It just seems creepy. I'm in this I'm in this group. I feel like the EPA wants to kill me. They want to take my Medicare away. They just want to kill me. But I'm not quite, you know, down the paranoid rabbit hole. But it sure seems when you read all this stuff that
It's not that they want. It's not that they want to kill you. It's again, they don't care.
care
Care
about
about
me.
It's not that the CEO at Aetna, who's made $200 million a year this year, saying, "Oh man, I want to hurt. I'm going to make Sandy Chalice's life more
No,
difficult."
me
No,
means hundreds of thousands of me's. People
yeah,
like
well, for
me.
him, it's just a question. His question is, am I going to make 200 million this year or not?
Exactly, it
And
is.
the way that 200 million this year is to hurt millions of people. That's how he makes it. And
Yeah,
so
I mean,
Listen,
it's
I know I'm
ruthlessness.
living
I
through
mean,
one of those nightmares right now in my personal life with insurance and the scams and the bullshit. So
it's everywhere. It's the
everywhere.
financial industry, just like Wells Fargo. I mean, they have their own thing, but Nick talking about how all these things are interconnected. Wells Fargo is one of the top contributors, or excuse me, financiers of oil expansion projects in the world. You know, and they also happen to be the top financial associate of my college, Appalachian State University. And so here, I'm fighting, the giants here, and we're, Appalachian State University is supposed to be the sustainability school in the southeastern United States. We claim to be, oh, look, we're researching sustainability, oh, we're very involved in the sustainable topic. But look, our top financial associate is the lead financer in destroying the world. So we have all of these institutional contradictions against our values, what we actually believe, and money's at the heart of that because capitalism through profit-driven motive does not value humanity, and nor does it value ecology. It doesn't value the biosphere. And so for Wells Fargo, they see a future investment in fossil fuels as legitimate because it's just simply, it doesn't matter to them that developing fossil fuels leads to a higher atmospheric CO2 count, and that will warm the world and destroy this in human life. That's not their concern. What's their concern, what ends up hurting them, is that you destroy, for example, the ability to insure houses. And if you destroy the ability to insure houses, you can't mortgage a house that you can't insure. And so mortgages start to fall apart. Oh, well, now the bank cares about climate change. But it takes that type of indirect activity for Wells Fargo to care to destroying the planet.
I know.
And so that's kind of where we are right now, is that Wells Fargo is finally realizing, and it's stationed in San Francisco, California, which is interesting because that's where this is kind of the epicenter, where we're starting to, I thought it was going to be coastal communities where we saw the collapse of the housing market, but it might be in parts of California where these houses have just become uninsurable due to wildfire risk. And Wells Fargo is
that's another big deal.
So I think the people who lose their houses, this is just a conversation I want to get started. But if you have a bank that is financing the cause of what is making your house uninsurable, you should probably sue that bank.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to get in that far, but let's go to Gene. So what's the plan? There's a lot of plans.
Wells Fargo.
Yes, sue Wells Fargo.
Sue Wells Fargo, sue Exxon, sue Energy Transfers, sue the Obama administration. And actually, there are actually a group of kids in the United States who are suing the Obama administration. Dr. James Hansen is there with them, the former director at the Goddard Institute for Space Center's NASA. So people are moving on this. We are identifying people who are actively standing in the way of progress, whether it be Donald Trump, Rex Tillerson, Hillary Clinton, President Barack Obama, ExxonMobil, or Energy Transfers, Wells Fargo.
That's who has to collapse. All of them. All of the, but then you know what's going to happen is they want to transfer to different energies or whatever, and all the guys, the LIUNA guys from the laborers unions are freaking out that, oh my God, they're going to take our jobs away. It's a big clusterfuck. Boop. Sorry, guys. I meant to keep this one without the F word, and it slipped out once. I guess it's because I'm getting loopy tired. Um, Guys, do you have questions out there? If anybody has questions, put them up now and tell us who they're towards. Because, except for me, ask the two guys towards Antonio or Nick, because I'm getting past my bedtime. So I'm going to put this up on the screen. Who's got a question? Somebody's got a question. I'm sure they do. Everything else now is talk, talk, talk. Harley Canine says, talk, 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 talk. Well, that's what we do. We talk. You know, I'd like to be out there with XR, quite frankly. I would love to, but I can't. Well, I don't see any questions. Oh, Heidi. Well, she's just the best. She's such an activist. Go to our Children's Trust. The kids in Juliana versus the United States suing the climate change catastrophe. She is.
Oh, I thought I just saw a question.
She's up. You did. Whose question? Come on.
Grand Solar Minimal, any opinion on that, please?
Which one?
That is by D. Vincent W.
Oh, D. Vincent. Okay. Hi, D. Vincent. I watch his channel once in a while. He was playing the guitar the other day. All right. Go for it. Who wants to do that, Nicholas?
Oh, well, I can do that,
Yeah.
obviously. The solar cycles of the sun aren't going to make very much difference.
No, by what, 3%?
Yeah, it's a very small change compared to the rapid rise in carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere right now. That's really what's dominating climate change. So the solar minimums, maximums, they're not making as very much of an appreciable difference. And they're relatively short time scales that they're happening. Global warming is a long-term phenomenon, and it's far more powerful effect, a human effect right now. So, nope.
Nope.
Unfortunately, yeah.
All right, D. Vincent, there you go. Solar nothing. Poop. It's not anything. Nothing to worry about anyway. A lot more to worry about than that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like your local environment, like where you live, your backyard, and all the things Antonio talked about. Anybody else? Because, guys, it's an hour and 12 minutes for us, and I think that's a pretty good show. It wasn't
There was
quite...
one question I did want to answer because it was pretty simple.
Where was it?
And what was the gentleman's name that asked me? Let's see here. If I can find it.
Copy Cooney? CB? Oh, Nick. Oh, that's CB. Has Nick, do you think the Chechen Sea will freeze? We could do that one first. Nick,
it was actually by Yami. She was just asking me how much sea level rise by 2035, literally how many feet.
Okay, so I'm putting each question by each of you. So each of you has a question by each of you, but I got to cancel this thing that just wrecked my screen. Okay. Who wants to go first?
Well, on the sea freezing, it will. Although I don't know how, there's no way to know how well it will freeze. It's at very, very record low levels right now. I don't have much confidence in how fast it will refreeze and how significant the refreeze will be. If it'll get back to a more normal level anytime soon. But right now it's too abnormally warm. The waters are too warm. The air is too warm. There's been powerful high pressure systems that have been sitting above there. So you're getting very, very warm temperatures relative to normal in Alaska. We're getting a lot of the cold air that should be up there right now. So it's going to be a very, very interesting freeze season this December, November and December, remainder of November into December for for the Arctic and Alaska and northeast Siberia.
All right,
And
Nick.
that's a question about sea level rise
Yep.
By 2035. My best understanding, according to NOAA data, the NOAA is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, is that we're going to have about 1.5 to 2 feet of sea level rise by 2035, which would represent severe levels of sea level rise. Not yet at what would be unequivocally a catastrophe, but certainly a global disaster. So that's 2035.
Well, I think Harley was now upset about, he said he's being ignored. Why did nobody care about Inslee? Why didn't any of you get behind him? He was the climate change. I don't know if I didn't. He pulled out. I didn't.
Yeah,
I didn't endorse anybody, but he said, you all talk about how electing politicians who care about climate change is so important. Not one word about him. But he's not in anymore.
I'll say this about Jay Inslee really quickly. I do like the fact that he is focusing on climate change. But for the first time in my life, I realized there is a difference between liking a politician, liking their policies, and also trusting them. And in this election, more than anything, trust has become a really big factor for me. And I didn't know Jay Inslee very well or his record, but I know I can trust Bernie Sanders, or at least I just have that sense about him, is that I really do believe that, he's going to give it all. And he supports a Green New Deal, so he's at least going in the right direction for me, where I think it's going to be, if Bernie Sanders is in the House, we're fighting.
Bernie, are you out there watching? Are you in the house? Anna and Chase.
It's kind of funny. I grew up hearing the name Inslee because I grew up in Seattle, and Inslee represented a district not far from Seattle. So I was interested when he ran, but I mean he was usually considered a sort of moderate liberal, whatever liberal happens to actually mean, politician. And I thought it was interesting he took such a strong stance on climate change and being interested in climate change, but I never really expected him to take off just because he didn't have a lot of name recognition, basically, outside of the state of Washington and maybe the Pacific Northwest.
Okay. Well, I think it's going to be a good night, guys. And I know that there's a lot going on. Oh, okay. We'll end with Book Hermit saying, because Book Hermit is famous on these channels, Bernie might try, but he won't accomplish much. He won't be willing to take the drastic measures. We don't feel the same way, Book Hermit, but you know what? You're always welcome in all of our shows. Okay, guys. Well, listen. Gene, how can I not end? I am hoping for an EMP to hit China and the U.S. Is that a good way to stop? Oh, Jean, that's funny. She's from Costa Rica, so she doesn't have to worry. She's not in our insane country. Well, everybody, thank you so much for coming. This was terrific. And we will take up on this another time. Hopefully, Jennifer will join us for a State of the Planet, when we get that together for the four of us. But tonight was fun, guys. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you so much for having us.
Well, don't hang up yet. I'm going to finish. Thank you all. Peace. Night, guys.